is the strongest physical evidence that suggests ancient civilizations possessed advanced technology?
I would say that it's all around the planet. Definitely Egypt for sure. But one thing that I've often thought about in regards to Egypt is that one of the least. Does anybody here know what the one of the least unexcavated places is on Earth? That's a good answer. But also the Sahara Desert, right? And we know that about 13,000 years ago there was a lush oasis. It wasn't a desert. And so mainstream archaeology doesn't really go and look into the Sahara because they're already convinced that we were primitive back then, there's nothing to look for. Now, there's probably some covert or some shadowy parts of the world that are going ahead and looking anyway, especially with LiDAR at this moment and scanning what's going on there. So I feel that there could be some really huge discoveries in the Sahara that could change our history books that connects to Egypt. And if you follow the story of the Atlanteans coming from Atlantis and then having a colony of Egypt that either existed afterwards or simultaneously, do you think that they just skipped over Morocco and Algeria and just went over to Egypt? Right? Isn't it also interesting how the Egyptians, such a great civilization, don't really have an empire? They didn't really go around the planet conquering, right? So there's so much there to discover. But I would say that two places I'm really interested in that are also smoking guns is Peru. I think it's underrated in regards to what you can discover there. It's almost like the whole of Peru is one big archaeological site. You can go to the backyard of somebody's house and there's a 75.6% chance if you dig, you're going to find something, you know? It seemed that it had been inhabited for a long, long time, and then DNA results show that the inhabitants from there, from the Paracas region and the descendants, did not come from the Alaskan land bridge, which is the story that we've been told, right? So, and if you look even deeper into the DNA results, they come from Mesopotamia. Is that a Sumerian connection? Elongated skull beings, maybe they're descendants of the Nephilim, right? And then there's all the distortions there with the naturally elongated skulls and the cranial deformation, right? So people, when you mention it to someone that might be a mainstream scholar, they just immediately say, "Well, that's cranial deformation. You're, conspiracy theorist." So Peru, we can go in for hours on, but then the other one that is one that I'm super passionate about is Malta, the caves of Malta. It seems that these ancient civilizations um, operated at a level of technology and consciousness that was at such a high level that it's almost impossible for many people on Earth to see it as technology. We can't even fathom what they're doing. Imagine this: 110 hertz frequency emanating out of all the caves of the island of Malta, right? Now, if I was the emperor, king, or whatever, and I said to you, "Hey, I want you to carve these caves out of stone, right? Not building with bricks, carve it out of stone. But when you're done, make sure that when it's silent, there's 110 hertz. When the wind blows through, is 110 hertz. When someone chants in there, it takes the chant and converts it to 110 hertz, right? You need to be thinking of such a multiple dimensional reality that in your consciousness, time doesn't even exist. You already see the outcome before it happens, right? So I think that the evidence is everywhere. Where people are going to the caves, you can go there right now. But I think our level of consciousness needs to match what they were doing. Egypt, for example, I think they're operating at left, right hemisphere um, in such an amazing way. And one example I'll just leave you with before I close out here is that not only is every single thing embedded with mathematics so that in case there's like some sort of great cataclysm, we can rediscover all disciplines over again, and we can even the distance from one pyramid to another is in alignment with some sort of mathematical equation. Even the distance of Thoth's staff on every single place you can find Thoth. His staff and the tilt of his staff is 23.5 degrees, the tilt of the Earth's axis, right? So not only were they mathematical geniuses, but they were creative geniuses simultaneously. And through art, which is Egypt is a piece of art, they embedded all these mathematical equations of how to recreate civilization. So it's truly beautiful, and soon it's going to, I think it's in the process of changing the world. More of us wake up to it. Yeah.
Good. There's a great deal of new research in the Americas, some by indigenous archaeologists. Paulette Steeves has done amazing work in the United States to redate many of these sites, and most of them go over 100,000 years in the past, which is brand new data. Dana, do we have any, do you have some feelings about what may have occurred in the Americas, and are there signatures that you can point out for us?
Interesting. I was thinking about that as everyone was talking. And I think there have been some expeditions into the Grand Canyon, and some Egyptian artifacts were found there, right? So all of these connections, people are ready to hear about it now. We've reached a level of consciousness where we can connect the dots and we can go there in our minds. Like, yes, this does not conform to our 3D rules of existence, a lot of this, right? So the ancient peoples, I feel, were able to travel. They were able to share their wisdom. For example, the Egyptians, the Maya, the Tibetans, however they did. Maybe it was some type of aircraft, maybe they were bilocating. You can see, evidence of this even in Abydos. The walls of Abydos have, if you've ever been there, you'll see a flying saucer inscribed. I think maybe it was on one of the ceilings. And so you can tell that these were spacecraft, and these were from, obviously from our star families, brothers and sisters coming to visit the Egyptians. So these connections are far more vast and multifaceted than we even imagine. But I find it fascinating about the Egyptian remnants in the Grand Canyon. And also, there was a book written a while ago, I can't remember the title, about the similarities between the Navajo peoples and the Tibetans. They share a lot of the same symbols, even their facial structures, and Neil talked about the passageway, right, from Asia to America. So I think America is very much in play here, and especially the ancient Andean shamans. They traveled through non-ordinary reality, and these people could bilocate, and I feel share information that way. Yeah.
There's also the possibility of advanced consciousness. We think of it as perhaps meditation. But Billy, are there other levels of consciousness that were used in the previous civilizations that we are tapping into now?
Oh, absolutely. If you just look at a lot of the ancient Egyptian texts, you discover that they're talking about the Merkaba. So we're talking about a double star tetrahedron, or a star tetrahedron, which is made of two tetrahedrons, one upright, one underneath, both spinning counterclockwise, one counterclockwise, one clockwise, one counterclockwise. And this is known as the vehicle of ascension. And so what they would do is, through this Merkaba type of a meditation, and particularly at this 936 hertz frequency, which creates movement, you can get into your own spiritual vehicle. And this vehicle was talked about in two ways. One way was a spiritual ascension, where you can actually in some way step out of the body during this meditation, get into your Merkaba, and travel and traverse the universe, or travel and traverse higher dimensions. And the other way is actually physical body, utilizing this Merkaba as an actual true vehicle to go from one place to the next. And according to the ancient texts, these ascended masters had this capability. They had so much knowledge of what the mind could do and the power of the mind. And I just came back from Australia in the outback, hiking about 67 miles there. I took some people on a tour. We were out there with the Aboriginals, and they call this dimension sleepy time. They recognize that this reality is just illusory, and that our soul is connected and tethered to a higher spirit version of ourselves in a higher dimension. That's higher dimensional thinking. And then I sat with the Hopi elders a few months before that in Arizona, and they told me that this world is dream time, and that we're living in an illusion, and that our soul is tethered to a spirit in a higher dimension. And they learned this from the Star Brothers. So in both cases, I said to them, where did this Star Brother knowledge come from? Who are these Star Brothers? And for the Aboriginals, I said, who are the people that you're referencing? And both of them turned to the Pleiadians. They said that the Pleiadians are Star Brothers for the Hopi. The Aboriginals just say the Pleiadians seeded us on this planet, and we were the first people, according to them, seeded on planet Earth. What made me start thinking, is this an abandoned seed colony, right? But Another thing that came out interesting in science is that the Brain Institute did some research on the human mind, and they discovered that the mind connects to up to 11 dimensions, and that we're thinking in this 11-dimensional framework. But then completely separate from that research, Michio Kaku and a team of theoretical physicists did some research, some mathematical models on the status and the state of the universe itself, how many potential dimensions exist. And all mathematical models pointed towards 11. When they tried to make it more than 11, it collapsed back down to 11. And so our mind is hyper-dimensional and thinking in these 11-dimensional frameworks, and the universe itself is 11 dimensions. So maybe it's set up like a chakra system. Is our mind connecting to these different energy nodes between different dimensions, going up higher dimensionally? And these ancients had the capability of understanding they can take this higher dimensional knowledge and utilize it to manifest reality. They called themselves the ordainers of destiny. They can literally foresee the future by taking mind outside of space and time, seeing multiple outcomes happen at the same time, and then picking and choosing one outcome to collapse into reality by taking particular actions towards the manifestation. In modern science, again, come up, look what happens. All of a sudden now they're realizing that the mind is able to think in multiple unlimited potential outcomes. And then if you actually hyper-focus on something which the CIA discovered called a hemisync, if you hyper-focus on something during binaural beat meditation, you can actually then hyper-focus and collapse one particular reality into existence. I believe that we're all doing it every single day. Every single day we're doing it. To get here, you had a choice. You had a conscious thought and a choice. You saw the ad or you saw the promotion. You had a choice to click it, and then you had to multiply the action behind it by actually buying it and then getting in a vehicle or an airplane and coming here, right? If you didn't do that, you wouldn't be here. But there's another reality that exists where you never did it. So there's this every time we make a conscious thought and act on that thought, we fracture reality. And that fractured reality takes us off in a slightly different direction, but the other parallel reality still exists. But the ancients knew about this so many thousands of years ago. We're just catching up to what the ancients already knew.
Kathleen, what do you feel about that? The advanced consciousness of the ancients and maybe some of the lessons we've learned now or it's coming to fruition now?
Yeah, I believe, I follow the yugas, and we've come out of the Kali Yuga now, and we're moving into the Dwapara Yuga, which is an ascending yuga. So we're moving into a higher state of consciousness. And just think of a conversation you had with somebody 30 years ago or 20 years ago. Would you be talking about near-death experiences? Would we have a panel here like this? No. So, and everyone you talk to has had some sort of telepathic experience, like, oh, I knew you were going to call, so we're seeing evidence of this. And, and this conference out here is proof of, look at how many people are here, and these are all over the world. I speak at all different places all over the world. So, this is proof of our consciousness rising. And I believe that there was a time in ancient times where time, from my perspective, goes in a spiral. It's not linear. So we're also revisiting times when we had higher consciousness, we had abilities. And I had a near-death experience in 1990, and I got to see time completely collapse. I was experiencing past, present, and future all at the same time. I had this happen again in the Great Pyramid in Egypt as well. So, and I'm not the only one. There's a lot of other people who've had these experiences. And what I got to see was that we have a future that we're walking into, that we're moving into collectively, that we are all choosing, that is much, much different from what we're experiencing now in this three-dimensional reality. So, from my perspective, I don't know how much longer that's going to take. It could be 100 years from now, who knows? But just the fact that I know that's happening is something that, just makes me want to continue to move forward and align myself with whatever I can to bring that future into reality.
Brad, you wrote a series of sacred place books. I think, was it 4 now? 4
I
different
wrote
books?
3 and published 4.
Yeah, and those books talk about these different locations, and there's an energy in each of those places. Talk a little bit about the importance of getting out in nature and that connection consciously and what that does for us.
Yeah, it's commonly known as the power of place. And when you put yourself in that position, say Great Pyramids, Angkor Wat, Sacsayhuaman, and the Sacred Valley of Peru, when you're in the presence of these megaliths and these locations, there's a very discernible power in them that you can start to tap into the ancients. And I always recommend getting there early before the throngs of people show up and just kind of tap into the consciousness of these locations, and you will get answers to your questions. You can ask, how are these megaliths built? You can say, what were they going for? What were they after? And oftentimes it is to elevate consciousness. There was a 19th century archaeologist named Howard Weiss from the UK that was one of the first people to get into the Great Pyramid. And you know, they blasted a hole to get in. It's not the original entrance. And once they got in, everybody was thinking they'd find treasure and were there to loot. But Howard Weiss had the presence of mind of collecting this white powder next to their sarcophagus in the king's chamber. And it just got stowed away into a shelf in the British Museum or somewhere. And somebody many years later said, hey, why don't we test this stuff? And they found that the white powder was residual from monatomic gold. So the ancients in Egypt were using the Great Pyramid to go on this incredible journey using monatomic gold out of their body. And the end result is when you sweat, you leave it in this granular powder form. So you could say one of the other uses of the Great Pyramid was an initiation chamber, a way to elevate people's consciousness higher. And the proof is in this white powder.
Fascinating. I've interviewed a number of indigenous people from around the world, and one of the things that they discuss is their ancestors' connection to star people. We don't have that relationship for whatever reason. Neil, what do we cherish about that, and what is missing, and how can we perhaps reconnect?
When I first got into, this awareness back in 2001, and I heard about the word ascension, it really validated how I felt so disconnected and lost as a child, that there was something that was off in the world. And then 20 something years later, I came full circle and I realized nothing was off in the first place. That I started realizing that descension was as good as the ascension. Recently, I had a 5-hour regression where I visited my lives in Orion. And on Orion, I was, you guys seen Thor when the guy is at the Rainbow Light Bridge and he has that trident and he lets people go through the Rainbow Light Bridge. I was that person in the central sun of Orion, where I was a Stargate keeper, and I had been there for hundreds of lives, 101 lives, and I would always incarnate into that planet and live in this hut next to the Stargate. And just kind of like the show, like there was a code, and then people could go into this Stargate. And until there was the Lyran Wars, and we were overpowered by the reptilians, and I vividly remember like the war that I was in. And as this happened, they went and hijacked the technology and they came down to Earth 100 million years ago and played the long game because they were in between states. They're in between realities where they were able to manipulate 100 million years of Earth's history from the dinosaur age to now in order to slowly change genetics so they could incarnate on the planet into human bodies but not forget who they are, right? And I was seeing this whole thing, and then I asked in my regression, what's the name of the portal? And it said the portal to descension. And I was tripped out because my organization is the portal to ascension. And I was like, I I was the guy at the portal to descension. And so that led me down this whole route of like the descension process and the willingness and the choice that we do that we take to come down here, right? So just like my whole understanding of what's good and what's bad, what's evil, what darkness is, has morphed in order to see that darkness and evil and this atrocities we see on the planet are disconnected parts of source that have become so disconnected that they don't even see themselves in the original source anymore. You know, like we all came. There's scientific way to look at it. There's the metaphysical way, right? Quantum physics. Metaphysics to me is metaphorical quantum physics, right? So in quantum physics you have singularity. Metaphysics you have oneness, right? Singularity became duality. Oneness became the duality, and then the singularity became darkness and light. So if singularity is God, do you think that when Source, God's singularity, split into two, it loved one part of itself more than the other? Or did it love both of itself equally? And if anything, did it maybe love the darkness a little more because that was the unknown, right? And then as we slowly descended and descended, the polarity became masculine and feminine energies without any gender. And then we descended more, and then we became embodied humans with these energies. And then we descended more, and then we became so fragmented from source that we now are in lowest of realities where there's all these beings in astral realms and wounded people that just don't see themselves in the light anymore, right? And this is all to get back to the original question. You know, my parents, when I was raised Hindu, right? So my parents said to me when I would say, you know, how did Krishna speak to Arjuna? How did Rama speak to the gods? How was he an incarnated God on earth? And she would say, there was a time where the veils were thin, okay? And this is just like, no shade on my mom, but this is blind faith Hinduism, okay? So blind faith Hinduism still has it in there, you know? Because the reason why I left Hinduism is because of blind faith. I found it later when I started discovering the truths within it. And so the veils within, there was a time we could communicate with the gods, and then even in the Mahabharata with Arjuna, Arjuna says to Krishna, there will be a time where the Yuga falls, and humans will forget their connection, not be able to speak to the gods, right? And it's all good. Now it's on the upturn in consciousness, thank God. And the theme of the Yuga cycles we've been in, Kali Yuga, is hierarchy, authority, and delusion. Okay, I don't need to tell you more about that. Hierarchy, authority, give up a power to authority, hierarchical, even dimensions. We consider higher dimensional beings as higher dimensional. They don't consider us like that. It's a different bandwidth of frequency of experience. We hierarchical make things hierarchical. And then the delusion. What's right is wrong, what's wrong is right. Now we're going into the next age, which is the Dwapara Yuga, the Bronze Age. And that's the themes of that is sovereignty and energy. It begins with us realizing, oh, there's electricity, energy, right? And then it goes into, oh, wait, everything's made out of quantum energy. And then it ends up being, holy crap, we are energy. And what do we do with that, right? So that's the age we're in. And as we're doing that, we're going from the great forgetfulness to the great remembrance. And now a remembrance of the connection to the ETs and the communication is specifically because we're getting to a place now that we had the contrast of the darkness enough to understand what it means to be in the polar opposite. And as we understand the polar opposite, because we've been in that darkness now, we got to realize we're the ones that wiped our memories clean in the first place. Because isn't it great experience to like, oh, I've done everything in the universe. What else can I do? Man, let me wipe my memory clean, come down to earth, forget that I achieved anything, and see if I can still figure it out, right? And now that's the human situation, in my opinion.
That's great.